Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer and welcome to another Sociology of Media Voices series. Today I'm speaking to an activist with a passion that we're going to find more about. Her name is Myfan Jordan. Myfan Jordan is an LGBTIQ and plus community planner for the Benue City Council. She is also founder of the Director of Grassroots Research Studio. She is passionate about public policy, co-design and social innovation research. She has extensive experience in community participation and development, leadership and project management skills. She is also an advocate for gender, ageing, disability, and the politics of hate. Welcome, Myfan Jordan.
Thank you, Ricky. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'll just correct your pronunciation of my name. That's darling. All right. It's Myfan.
Myfan.
Myfan, yeah. But people have been mispronouncing it for 57 years now, so I'm used to it.
And tell us a little bit about what got you into this space of advocacy.
Oh, look, I suppose, I'm just sort of thinking about cutting a long story short. I was certainly interested in a kind of informal ally for LGBTIQ+, or I don't think it even had an acronym back when I started being interested in kind of, gay rights and things like that from my teenage years, I suppose. And then I went on from that to do university degree as a mature age student. I sort of left Australia, I lived in the UK, I moved to the UK and did a degree in social policy and also kind of diploma in criminology. And then I went on to do media and cultural studies. And so sort of through each of those kind of academic pursuits, I was really focused on projects in relation to the community as one of many communities experiencing disadvantage. And I was always particularly what's the right word? It's not attracted to, but interested in hate crime and the kind of definition of hate crime, and just, I suppose, an awareness of how much the kind of the zeitgeist or the popular culture, how much of an impact, I suppose, that has on people experiencing disadvantage. And, like many of us who grew up in Australia in the 1970s, it was a pretty tough gig. And, while there's been, incredible improvements in terms of legislation around discrimination, a lot of that culture continues, and it may have moved a little bit further sort of out of the playgrounds and onto online spaces. But I'm really keen on having a strong legislative framework and criminalising that sort of behaviour. So not that I'm anti-freedom of speech, but I'm pro-respectful speech. And so I suppose that's always informed my my thinking and my interest in social policy. So I guess my first kind of key job, I went into the community sector in the UK, and I lived in Brighton and Hove. And at that stage when I moved down there, I was married to a gay man. I was in a 10-year marriage to a gay man. And so, Brighton, I don't know if you know Brighton and Hove, but it's a kind of the, highest queer population in the UK. So I spent a lot of time in pubs in what my then husband used to call the gay ghetto, and getting to know people and understanding a lot more about that culture. So all the kind of experiences I had there then took me into my policy work and my community sector work. So I ended up working for local government, so Brighton and Hove City Council, in the housing department, and I worked both in policy, but then as a community participation officer working with tenants. And I suppose that's really where I found my passion and hopefully some skill for I'm not the greatest, what's the word? I'm not the most articulate advocate myself, but I'm one of those people who's really good at putting other people's, giving a platform, I suppose, to people whose voices aren't quite so easily heard. So I was incredibly fortunate in terms of policy work to be working for a local government, and in a time in the UK where there was a really strong legislation around equalities and human rights, and that was tied with their, previous role in the European Union, and the European High Court of Human Rights, and so that gave, incredible. It had a real trickle down effect into what we did in local government. But I think I also worked there for a really forward thinking local government, and they funded officers like me to do exactly that. So it was to go out, work with tenants, and similar to Australia, but perhaps even more so, tenants in public housing. There's nobody with a public housing tenancy that doesn't have at least one kind of, characteristic, vulnerability, but usually multiple. So really everybody was, had a lifelong chronic illness or disability. They were asylum seekers or older people. So, a range of needs. And I worked very quickly with people at the grassroots, and I guess developed my passion for what I didn't know had a name then, but now know as co-design research, which is really, working with people with the lived experience and saying, well, this is the problem from the kind of policy perspective, what would you do? And I really firmly believe that, I'm not the expert. I may have been to university and I know about some of the frameworks, but the expert is, of course, the person with the lived experience, and often they're the person with ideas as well. So, I just love that. And I love working with people in the community and kind of coming up with ideas. And then I'm, once that kind of takes shape, I'm really passionate about moving things forward and knocking on doors, and I'm a bit sort of relentless in that I don't give up on a good idea once it's there. So, I do quite like, I'm attracted to campaigning and influencing and, all those kind of things in the way that you are, Ricky. So, and in fact, that's sort of how we met. So I guess that's a kind of a very brief view of some of the work. I mean, I did work specifically, I did do a kind of a role working on a lesbian domestic violence, as it was called then, steering group for a women's organisation called Threshold back at the turn of this century, and that was really interesting as well, because I did my social science. I majored in criminology and criminal justice, and so family violence is another area of interest. And of course, at that time when that steering group came out, there was very little, there was no literature or research about LGBTIQ plus family violence. It kind of wasn't recognised. And even within that group of women, lesbian identifying women, there was a real sense of kind of stigma and shame attached to that, because, it was then framed as a women's issue, and that, the perpetrators were male and it was against women, so that was the kind of the narrative that went alongside that then. So that was a very interesting project, but unfortunately it just dissipated, I think, really because of that sense of shame and stigma and where they would take it. And then when I moved back to Australia about 10 years ago, I started working more in aged advocacy and working around with disadvantage in older age. You come across every population group, but I did some interesting work specifically around the LGBTIQ plus communities as carers, aged care outcomes, and a lot of work has been done around that by, I don't know if you've heard of Catherine Barrett, but she's
Absolutely.
so fantastic academic and looking at, all kinds of things around LGBTIQ plus aged care, and Val's Cafe. And so, got to know some of those organisations. And while I was at COSA, which is Council on the Ageing Victoria, I partnered with Transgender Victoria to get some funding, and we did a research kind of co-design project, which ended up being Safeguarding the End of the Rainbow, which most of the work, I left the organisation, so it wasn't, most of the work which came from that wasn't done by me, and not taking credit for it, but it was a really, I think, important piece looking at all those kinds of things that generally we tend to ignore, and which can be particularly complex if you're, if you're LGBTIQ plus, because this was prior to the marriage equality going through, and there were just lots of considerations about, family of origin versus family of choice, and who's going to make decisions about you in terms of medical care, medical power of attorney, writing your will. So there was a really low, traditionally there's a really low take up of, particularly of transgender men and women, doing those sort of end of life, preparing for end of life, finding an executor, writing a will. There's a lot of experiences of discrimination from solicitors and the legal service. So it was quite an in-depth report, which it's still available online, and I would keep recommending it to people because it really covers everything and looks specifically at the needs of those groups. And then after that, I kind of went to work for a public policy think tank, and again worked on mainly with older women, age disadvantage, women experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity. And I did a project around collective outcomes. So this is I guess another passion of mine is around, I'm quite, I guess you'd say, anti the kind of focus on individualism that we have today, that we're all individual consumers. And I think that, that comes at the loss of that sense of community. And so I looked at kind of mutual outcomes for older women experiencing housing insecurity and co-housing in particular, which is an interest of mine. And I continued to do some voluntary work on the side with Co-Housing Australia, who are the plug for them. They're a great organisation and they need new members. And then eventually I've ended up back in local government at Banyule City Council, and the role of community planner for LGBTIQA plus came up, which is fantastic. Banyule actually topped the Equalities Index for LGBTIQ plus inclusion in 2020 out of the Melbourne Metropolitan Councils. Unfortunately, I can't take any credit for that. So it was all based on work by my wonderful predecessors. So we have the rainbow tick for our home care services, aged and disability home care services. We flag raise for all the important international days. We've always been at Midsummer, and for the past few years have held a midsummer event called Queer Street in Montmorency, and a lot of other work. We have an advisory committee which has been running now since 2014, and we also have an LGBTIQ plus action plan. So it's been a really key part of Banyule's work, and so I've been really lucky to come into that role with something so well established by, as I said, predecessors who are very passionate, but also our committee. So I came in with an established committee, which finished up in July, and we just had the first meeting of our new LGBTIQ plus committee last night. And, that's incredibly exciting, fantastic group of people, full of passion, ideas, contacts, and, in a range of ages. Having worked in aged advocacy, I'm really interested in the kind of, the life course approach for people from the LGBTIQ plus community, and, the needs of younger people are very different perhaps from the needs of older people, but the experiences that we have as young people, they shape your future outcomes as well. So we're in the process of developing our new LGBTIQ plus action plan. We may be adding the A to the acronym. That's up for discussion at our next meeting. And that'll be a 4-year plan. And we're hoping it's going to be kind of a living document with the advisory committee essentially having ownership and stewardship of that plan, and kind of telling me what work they want me to do and where they want me to focus, possibly, we've got a little bit of budget, where do they think that might be best spent. They don't make decisions about how the budget is spent, but, as a committee, they have a very strong influence in what I put forward to the council in terms of where we should be targeting our resources. So, yeah, it's a really exciting role, and I'm lucky to have it. I think I changed jobs in the middle of the pandemic, so yeah, it's a great job to have, and I've been meeting some really great people like yourself and the Maribyrnong group. So yeah,
Wow, what a incredible life journey that you've had, and your desire for enacting social change from that grassroots lived experience is so important and so valuable as we entering this period of enormous change with COVID-19. And one of the things I would like to get your view on is, why do we still need an LGBTIQ presence within our governance, within local councils?
Yeah, look, I think that, we've made, astonishing inroads from, I mean, it was quite interesting for me, I guess, because I left Australia in the mid-80s and then came back in 2011, and the kind of social and cultural change had been, huge, and particularly, well, not particularly, but including LGBTI rights and anti-discrimination. But, there's still an enormous amount of work to be done. And there's organisations out there which you'll be familiar with. So the Victorian Pride Lobby, the Rainbow Local Government, who kind of are really kind of pushing for, every local government to have a kind of LGBTI group or an action plan. And there's certainly residents groups like the Maribyrnong residents group, which are really pushing and saying, we're part of this community. Our needs, our aspirations, our achievements don't always fit into the mainstream. We don't want to be invisible. We want to celebrate on certain days. And it's going to sound perhaps a bit, pie in the sky, but I think, local government is the tier of government closest to the people. I think that, the change has to happen within local government, and then through local government out into the local communities. And I really believe in that. And I think that, we have that privilege of being able to meet with people in the local communities and kind of shape conversations, and to give platforms to different voices, and just provide the balance, and hopefully provide a kind of safe space for people to have conversations. I think a lot of discrimination or hate is born of fear, and that's of no surprise, or just that kind of discomfort. And I think, we're for anybody really, we all grow up with certain cultural norms and morals of what is right and wrong, and some of those are very challenged by, LGBTIQ plus identities. Not so much in the younger generation. And my both my children are at school, and the amount of kind of non-binary friends and, you know, changing identities that they talk about is just, you know, it's music to the soul, really. So, you know, it just shows that the stigma is, you know, it's very different from the experience you and I would have had at school, Ricky. So, you know, there is change, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And I see, and I'm not speaking on behalf of council here. I must be clear that I'm talking as a individual person. I think, you know, there's a lot of what's the word, kind of, you know, powerful voices in Australia which aren't inclusive. And I think, you know, we're quite certainly having come from 25 years in the UK, which was a very secular culture. I was, you know, astonished to come back to Australia and still see that really strong influence of the church and various religions over everyday life that, you know, you just didn't have in the UK. I mean, I remember needing to buy coriander and a lime for an Easter lunch on Good Friday and being horrified to see that all the shops were closed, you know. So not saying that's a bad thing, and I'm respectful of everybody and their faith, and faith is really important to people and a positive thing. But I'm just, you know, I do feel that it needs to be separated from the laws of the land, and I do believe government is separate to that. And I think that as governments we have a really clear role to, you know, promote human rights and to actually operationalize it. You know, if local councils can't operationalize equality, who is going to do that? You know, continually underfunded community organisations, you know, people in the community who do an incredible amount, but then experience kind of campaigning fatigue and consultation fatigue. So I feel that, you know, government should pay for people like me to support people in the community and make it as easy as I can for them to be able to put their voices and needs forward.
And why is there such still a presence for the politics of hate in Australia?
Yeah, look, I mean, I still feel, I mean, I describe myself as a lapsed Australian because I've spent nearly half my life overseas, and most of that in the UK, but I lived in Canada as well. And yeah, I think for me, a lot of it comes down to a lack of honesty about what our culture actually is. So we talk a lot in Australia about the fair go and mateship and just qualities I don't believe define Australian culture anymore. I think we're far more perhaps on what I would call the sporting or hierarchical model of what is best. And it is about win-win-win. It's about the money. It's about power, money, showing off to the Joneses next door, having stuff. And I think a lot of that, you know, we used to be quite, I don't know, when I was young, I'm showing my age, but, you know, perhaps more humble as a society and focused on, you know, doing our duty, whether that was going to church or helping our neighbours. And that still goes on, but it's not what's talked about. You know, we see much more, and it's not just Australia, it's globally, you know, this kind of absurd inequalities of wealth and kind of TV shows about these kind of absurdly rich people, which, you know, they were great in the 80s when they first came out, but now we know that it's that sort of behavior which is, you know, going a long way to destroying the planet. And I just think, you know, we need to really scale back and look at collectives and you know, some of the powers of getting people together in the community and moving things forward, because I think you know, genuinely individual people are wonderful. I think we're just, you know, we're led by a kind of systems which are hierarchical in nature, and that doesn't really make anybody except for those at the top it doesn't bring happiness to anybody except for the people that control the power.
And tell me, what made you decide to pursue and develop the grassroots research studio?
Well, look, I finished up in my job I was working for a kind of a Labor Party think tank last year, and during the pandemic, and I sort of took some voluntary redundancy, and at the same time being very clear that, my personal kind of political views aren't really allied with the Labor movement, because increasingly I've always been very interested in kind of conservation, and I, did work for the Wilderness Society many years ago. So I've always been interested in the green movement, much more green politics, and increasingly become aligned with what I kind of describe as degrowth policy, and that's where I'm increasingly focusing on. So, but I set up the Grassroots Research Studio when my position finished, and I thought, okay, well, if I'm ever going to start up a business, I may as well do it in the middle of a pandemic when I'm unlikely to get paid work. So it is a research and kind of research and evaluation it's a consultancy at the moment, but I'm hoping to kind of channel it into a not-for-profit organisation, because I'm not interested in making profit in that sense. And again, it is focused on hearing voices from the grassroots and thinking about what comes out of that, and what implications that has for policy, or what policies we could have that would support people better. So at the moment, because it's still only fairly new, we've just focused on one research project, which is just in its final stages now, and the research report is due to come out. So that was called Generation Expendable, Older Women Workers in the Pandemic Economy. And it was focused at women over 40, and it was a survey which kind of went out over social media and various other outlets, exploring their work outcomes and other things. So it looked at work conditions, workplace culture, and workplace circumstances. So whether women had lost jobs, because a lot of it in the pandemic was framed as a female recession, or a pink recession, a she session, because a lot of the initial workers to go were younger people and women as well, who are in part-time and casual work. But nobody was really looking at women over 40. So we did a survey around that, and we did ask whether they, kind of thought, out of the survey, 72% said that they had experienced negative impacts from the pandemic, which it probably isn't surprising. But many of them also highlighted that they'd had negative financial impacts, which will affect their retirement. So it's like because it's very difficult to get work once you're over 50, really. But evidence shows that really it's over 35 that age discrimination starts to kick in for women, and there's what we call the dual discriminations of age and sexual discrimination kick in. What is interesting, I suppose, from the point of view of the LGBTIQ plus community, so it was a small study. We had just over 150 respondents to the online survey, and it was followed up with some one-on-one interviews or case studies. But we had, I think it was about 7.2% identified as LGBTIQ plus responding to the survey. And one of the key findings of the survey were not just that a third, roughly between a quarter and a third of everyone surveyed felt that either their age, their gender, or the combination of the two had shaped the outcomes for them at work, but over 50% of the women who took part cited that they'd experienced workplace bullying during the pandemic or prior to, and breaking down some of that in terms of the differences between like cis women answering and women who may be cis women, but you know, LGBTIQ plus who tick that box, and we didn't kind of specify any further. Where the bullying was about the same for both groups, but, and you know, obviously it was a very small study, but you know, there were differences in the types of bullying which the LGBTIQ plus women experience. So, you know, for example, I think one of the criteria was malicious rumours, and that hadn't happened to any of the cis women, but it had happened within the LGBTIQ plus group, and also something like kind of innuendos. So there were definitions of workplace culture or bullying taken from the Fair Work Commission, and also from a much larger study, a UK study, International Health Service there. So that was really interesting. And again, you know, speaking about that, the kind of rainbow community in the context of that study was unlike the kind of, you know, the cis cohort or the heteronormative cohort, they all of them experienced you know, some kind of, well, not all of them, many of them experienced health kind of impacts from having undergone those changes at work during the pandemic. But, and I think it was rated at about, I should have it in front of me, but maybe about 48% for the non-LGBTIQ plus, but it was 100% of those for the LGBTIQ plus community. So not all of them had experienced bullying, but other kinds of behaviours, and that kind of got me thinking, you know, that I don't know, you know, first it got me thinking, oh, that, you know, that's terrible, and some of the women cited, you know, it brought back, it was a return of kind of post-traumatic stress disorder, or you know, like a, you know, depression which they'd had before, so it exacerbated previous mental health problems. But for others, it was new. And I guess one thing that struck me about that, and you know, possibly thinking of this for a next project for the Grassroots Research Studio, was that it also kind of suggests evidence, you know, looking at it from a strengths-based approach, of really high emotional literacy within the community. And that's something I've certainly seen, you know, kind of anecdotal evidence of a lot, you know, and that, you know, I guess, you know, the underpinning knowledge is that kind of wisdom born of pain approach, that people have experienced these. But having done work as well with younger queer people, you know, they're really in touch with talking about their emotions and naming it. And I have anxiety, and you know, so I do think that that could be something that it would be good to understand better for the LGBTIQ plus communities, and perhaps to see how we can, you know, kind of start to maybe reposition that as a strength of people, and, you know, and tie it in. I'm sure it has links too with kind of empathy for other people. So, you know, I love that idea of, I suppose, particularly of, you know, noticing or unearthing evidence of something which people might see as a negative, but kind of looking at ways that you could use the knowledge as a positive, and to inform policy, and to, you know, to benefit people more broadly. I think the kind of heteronormative community could learn a lot from that.
It's just amazing that work and those ideas. If there are people out there that are listening and feel passionate about wanting to be involved, how can they get in touch with you in relation to the studio that you've set up?
Oh, that's good for you. Look, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. Yeah, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter. I've got a website.
Oh, okay.
I built it myself during my hiatus between jobs, so it's really basic, but I'm still incredibly proud of it. So that's www.grassrootsresearch.com.au, she says. But
Put a
you know,
link to that too. So for anyone
yes,
listening, that will definitely we'll double check that and we'll make sure that's available. Because I
great.
can imagine a lot of people listening at the moment are thinking, I really want to do that. I love these ideas and I want to help.
Yeah.
And how can I be involved? So um, I'm assuming that there is scope for people who can put their hand up
Yeah, look,
and be involved.
completely. And, you know, if people have ideas or projects or things that they think are worth exploring, you know, I guess I bring those kind of skills of being able to write, you know, project plans and things and apply for funding. I mean, at the moment, I have no, you know, particular funding stream. So I'm also working full time at Banyule City Council, and, you know, but there's ways to kind of, you know, I'm a community planner, so who knows, I could possibly tie in some work there. And so yeah, the grassroots research stuff is, I guess it's a bit more, well, you know, it's not just focusing on Banyule, but I suppose it's a little bit more politically or kind of advocacy focused, and it really is about, you know, finding the strengths within more marginalized communities and trying to embed those strengths and that knowledge into public policy. And I really believe that, you know, that is the way that we're going to change society and kind of improve things for people. I might be a bit naive, but, you know, you've got to have hope. And so, and, you know, it's great. And I look back and, you know, I mean, I'd love people to contact me. There is a contact form on the website. I prefer email. I'm not a great telephone person. But, you know, my best experiences in, you know, 20 years or whatever in the community and policy sector has always been not kind of partnering with colleagues, it's been partnering with community people. You know, that's what I find, you know, just amazing and stimulating, and that gives me motivation to keep going. Just that people who have had some, you know, been through some really tough experiences and not had some of the privileges that I might have had or others in terms of, you know, being able to undertake paid employment and get an education and all those things, you know, have fantastic knowledge and a voice that needs to be listened to and given a platform. So yeah, I guess that's what keeps me going. So there's a lot of work to be done that way. I guess it kind of segues too into the housing project which I'm doing at Banyule City Council. So I can kind of talk a bit from that, but that ties in with my grassroots research, focus on those kind of collective living and localism and co-housing, which I mentioned before, which I've kind of written about in my last job for the think tank. But I'm really passionate about looking at how people can come together and build their own communities and what kind of community infrastructure and policy we need to put in place to support that. So at the moment, there's a huge amount of barriers if you want to try and get a co-housing community established, and really to get into, there's some people doing fantastic work, but you need money to buy into those. And there are some through common equity housing and some social housing ones, but not very many. And I really think that, you know, we're putting all this, the Victorian government's putting all this kind of economic renewal money into social housing, but they're not looking at co-housing as one model of that. And the research I'd done previously with older women found that they really wanted that kind of intentional community. So I applied for some funding as the community planner at Banyule, and received that to do a research project looking at young people and potential co-housing models for young trans and gender diverse and non-binary people. So, you know, who often experience, you know, home of origin, they're still at home, so family violence, not feeling accepted, there's high rates of homelessness, barriers to work, and And I'm very lucky to have you agree to be on the steering committee for that project, which is really exciting. And yeah, I've got Darebin and Moreland councils are also involved. And so I'm hoping that, you know, I can bring my knowledge around housing and co-housing and public policy, and that we'll be working with a group of young people that will, you know, provide all the texture and the kind of knowledge around what might support them. And it might be that they don't, you know, that they reject the kind of model of co-housing, and, you know, that's the point of co-design research, really. It's that, you know, it is the people that are the so-called end user that kind of makes the decisions. So I should just mention that that funding comes from the wonderful Transgender Victoria and some from the Victorian Department of Premier and Cabinet. So that's starting now and we'll be going for at least the next 6 months. So that's another project.
And that's hopefully in our next time together.
Yes.
On the interview, we can go into the details of that project.
Yeah, yeah.
If people are listening right now who feel that they may want to participate, what is sort of the age breakdown that you're looking for participants?
Between 16 and 25, I think. You know, I have said 16. I think it's great to have a slightly younger people. There might be just some kind of legal under 18 sort of forms that we have to go through with parents. But really, it's, you know, it's going to be a series of workshops. They will be reimbursed, of course. You know, I really believe in, you know, paying people for their time. So they will be getting kind of vouchers and, you know, hopefully the opportunity as well to build a bit of knowledge around how you develop policy and how you campaign and advocate for things. So once that's done, you know, the great thing about having, you know, a couple of other councils interested and other bodies is that, you know, you could then start to advocate for funding to run a pilot and see how that works sort of in the northern suburbs. So that's what we're hoping from the project, and I'm very grateful to Banyule City Council who've let me do a research project because it's not really a local government priority, you know. So I'm very lucky. I've got very supportive senior staff who think, yes, go for it. Great.
And that's wonderful. That's what we need to see more of. People like yourselves who really go out of the extra mile to make sure our voices in the community are heard. It has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom, your way forward, and we all listening, everyone that's listening throughout Australia, please check out the websites and the links that we're going to be provided. And if you have any ideas, suggestions, or you would like to discuss partnering up or funding suggestions, please send them across, as I'm sure they'll be well received. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for inviting me, Mickey. It's been really great.